Hello, everyone. This is AngryBob from the debatenetwork.com. And today's invitation to debate me revolves around this BS story that the U.S. does not need Canada and the Trump administration's continual economic attacks on its neighbor and ally. If you disagree, you can leave comments, sure. But what I want you to do is come and debate me. Engage me on the debatenetwork.com platform. I'll set up a debate. It will be set up by the time you see this. Future date. Come and apply to engage me in actual civil debate on this subject or any subject. So if you agree that the U.S. does not need Canada, come and debate me. Now, my point is, the U.S. does need Canada, and mostly because Canada is a resource powerhouse. Oil, natural gas, fertilizers, critical minerals, electricity, aluminum, lumber. The U.S. needs Canada for all these things. But let's look at a few of them individually. Let's start with oil. A great chunk of Canada's trade is energy with the U.S. Oil, one of those energy inputs we send south, Canada sends 4.5 million barrels a day in crude to American refineries that's refined into gasoline, diesel, jet fuel to fuel Americans' planes, trains, and automobiles. Now, that at $65 a barrel means the U.S. has purchased over a year over $107 billion worth of Canadian crude, per year. Now, it's important to note the U.S. does produce now 14 million barrels per day of beautiful light sweet crude, but because U.S. refineries are designed to process heavy Canadian crude, they can't use all this light sweet crude. But don't worry. You see, the oil companies, they sell this crude on the world market, and they sell it at a premium of around $85 to $90 a barrel. That, in 2024, allowed U.S. oil companies to rake in an additional $32 billion in profits. So they sell their oil, make a profit, and they bring in cheap Canadian crude. You see, oil is not oil. This spread between Canadian and U.S. light sweet crude, you would think would keep prices down, but you would be wrong. It doesn't. Even though you're buying the cheaper Canadian gas, the value of refined products is more on a global price, a world price. So gasoline, diesel, all these things, after they're refined, they're virtually the same on the international markets. Now, a $65 barrel of oil is actually worth about $130 in gasoline and about $145 in diesel. This difference between the $65 input cost and the refined product's value is known as, my favorite term in the oil and gas industry, the crack spread. That's right. A $65 to $85 per barrel differential on cost of good and the refined product is called the crack spread. Now, using Canadian oil, improves the crack spread because they're using oil that they buy at 65, not oil they have at 85. So using Canadian oil at a discount improves the crack spread. How much did it improve U.S. oil company profits? By another $30 billion. So $32 billion plus $30 billion is $62 billion reasons for U.S. oil companies wanting to have a very good relationship with Canada. Now remember, Canada now supplies 25% of U.S. oil needs to keep the economy running, the planes, trains, and automobiles. But what if that Canadian oil was no longer available? Where would your prices be? Well, it'd be way, way up. Not a possibility, you think? No. Canada has built one major pipeline to export to international markets, not just the US, and is planning to twin this. A second pipeline to export to Asia and other areas. Canada is expanding LNG production and exports, with new facilities being built on the west coast of Canada. Thanks to the war in the Middle East, brought to you courtesy of the US administration, Iran controls now the Strait of Hormuz, which affects 20% of world oil supply, and the Red Sea, which is 7% of all tanker traffic. Countries that previously thought that the US had an exclusive on Canada with respect to energy are realizing they can sign new agreements with Canada. It's not exclusive anymore. Let's change this. Let's talk about electricity. Canada supplies a significant amount of energy to border states along the US. New York State alone gets 20% of its power from Canada. What if that were to be cut off? As well, Canada supplies about 10% of your natural gas needs. And now, international agreements, everyone coming to Canada, they're all signing agreements for future liquefied natural gas projects. The point is, out of all this with energy, Canada is developing options beyond the US, who is very dependent on Canadian oil and natural gas and electricity. But it's not just there, folks. It's not just energy. Let's talk lumber. Do you Americans know that 30% of the lumber that's in the US comes from Canada? That is a tremendous amount that Canada supplies for construction, manufacturing, homes, renos, etc. The US does not produce enough to meet demand. Has not for decades. Canada has been filling this gap. It's 30%, this gap in the difference between what Canada supplies and what the US can produce is because the US lumber companies don't upgrade. They don't improve their production. And they are reliant on tariffs. They like tariffs. And this is why. Suppose you have two producers, a Canadian producer and a US producer. And they sell their lumber and it's $10 a board. Okay? But the US government comes along and says, that's unfair. Canadians are taking advantage of us. We will tariff their lumber 50%. So that's what they do. So the Canadian lumber, which was $10, now goes to $15. Do the US producers produce more lumber? No. Why should they? Instead, the Canadian price is $15. We're going to jack ours up to $15. So now they're making bank off of the consumer because the US government has implemented a tariff when the US market can't even supply domestic demand. How illogical is that? Now, what else is there? Well, you are very dependent on us for fertilizers. The US is very dependent on us for potash. Canada has the largest potash reserves in the world, over 1.1 billion tons. The US, in comparison, has a mere 220 million tons, a fifth of what Canada has. And so as a result, Canada supplies half of what the US needs for potash. That is about 12.5 million tons per year that the US needs. There's nowhere else you can buy this stuff. Okay, it is used for agriculture. It produces fertilizers, creates yield for the farmers, and dramatically improves yields and helps farmers so they don't go out of business because they're making some money. But unfortunately, these tariffs have come in. Or not tariffs, but the US believes that they don't need Canada. We don't need you for anything. Well, you need us for potash. The only other places you can get them are Laos, Russia, and Belarus. They have large enough deposits. But Laos can't produce nearly what the US consumes, which is 13 million tons a year. Canada supplies half of that. Let's talk critical minerals. Now, Canada has massive supplies of this, just like oil, potash, natural gas, and lumber. Part of the US energy grid runs on nuclear power, which supplies about 10% of all US electricity, as does a great deal of the US Navy run off of nuclear power, 13 carriers and 70 submarines, for example. Where does the uranium come from to power this? Canada, because it has immense reserves. It supplies 33% of the US uranium needs. We also supply a tremendous amount of metals for manufacturing, like aluminum. In fact, the US uses in production 5.5 million tons per year of aluminum, and Canada supplies roughly half of that, 2.5 million tons. And why does Canada produce it? Because the low cost of energy in Canada. The US does produce about 660,000 tons of the 5 million it needs, about 13%, but they don't produce more. And the reason being is the cost of electricity is too high to make it economically viable. So if you can't produce enough, you only produce 13% of what you need, why are you applying a 50% tariff on Canadian aluminum? That doesn't make any sense. A company like Boeing, who uses aluminum in airplanes, well, you just raised the price of every Boeing jet. And as a result, Boeing, in competition with Airbus for similar aircraft, well, Boeing planes are going to be naturally more expensive because of this 50% tariff on aluminum. Excuse me. Now, who pays for this tariff? Well, it's the consumer. It's Boeing who has to pay for the tariff. Canada doesn't pay the tariff on aluminum. Contrary to popular belief of the administration, there is no bank that has the tariff bank where these amounts go back and forth. They're paid by the importer. That is passed on to the consumer. Okay? So when you raise the price of aluminum, you make your jets more expensive, and manufacturing, U.S. aircraft is the number one export of manufactured goods in the U.S. But you've just raised the price of that. So what happens to U.S. manufacturing? It falls off. As it falls off, what happens? Well, people lose jobs, right? So you start losing jobs in various things. In the aircraft industry, greater unemployment. It's not just aircraft. Let me use another example of raising the cost of aluminum. Do you like beer? Well, what does it come in a lot of times? Aluminum cans? Well, those cans have all gone up 50% in cost. So a can that was 10 cents is now 15 cents. So again, adding more cost to the end consumer. That would be you, the guy or woman buying beer or having a Coke or a Pepsi or whatever it is. Now, Canada is a key supplier of the key inputs that run American society. There's no place to replace these things. Aluminum, the only other countries that produce aluminum in the volumes that the US could use are Russia, China, or India. And those are just national security nightmares. And why would you go halfway around the world when you have somebody who can supply your aluminum right next door and is a friend and an ally, or was a friend and an ally? So I say to the people of the US, wake up, drop this arrogance that you don't need Canada, and quit looking down your noses at Canada. The fact is, Canada has markets for all its resources and is forging global partnerships everywhere with like-minded neighbors or nations. 20 new free trade agreements in the past 18 months. The US can naively keep claiming they don't need Canada, keep tariffing Canadian goods, and in the process killing their own manufacturing proof. Want further proof? Okay. According to The U.S. Department of Labor, since Trump has taken office, February 2025, the U.S. has lost 75,000 manufacturing jobs. Where's all this winning? You're losing manufacturing jobs. What has changed? Tariffs. According to Forbes magazine, I love this. In Joe Biden's last year in office, he added, big number, 2.2 million jobs. Pretty good for a guy that Trump called Sleepy Joe. Imagine if he was awake. And one more thing. Regarding Biden, go Hunter. Love the commentary. Please keep it up. Disagree? Want to debate AngryBob? Because I'm getting a little pissed off and fed up with this American arrogance about not needing Canada. Come and engage me. Come and debate me. Right? Don't leave your comments. Come and debate me. So, in my opinion, be there or be square. This is AngryBob bidding you adieu.